a top 10 2014 list this far into 2015? Well, there's a reason for that. For those of you who don't follow me on social media and whatnot, my wife and I had a baby last July, and the rest of the year was kind of a blur. So aside from the movies that I was watching for the channel, I didn't really watch too much else. So after the new year, I spent as much time as I could getting caught up on all the stuff that I missed in 2014. With that out of the way, let's get to my personal top 10 list of 2014. Number 10, X-Men, Days of Future Past. While initially skeptical with First Class that they were rebooting the X-Men series, I'm very happy with how it all turned out. Days of Future Past is arguably the best X-Men movie of the bunch. I liked how well they took elements from the comic book and meshed them into the movie. It actually felt like they were tearing pages right out of the book and using that as storyboards. In the comics, it was Kitty Pryde, and in the movie, they used Wolverine going back in time. I understand why they did that, because basically, Kitty Pryde in the movies is not a main character. And to be realistic, people are coming to see Hugh Jackman as Wolverine. So if they would have had Kitty Pryde go back in time, it would have followed the comic closer, but probably wouldn't have resonated as well with mainstream audiences. I liked how they kind of jumped back and forth between the cast of the original trilogy and intertwined things with the new cast. It was a way for the original cast to pass the torch to the new cast and give some closure to their storylines. Number 9, Nightcrawler. Jake Gyllenhaal plays a guy who's looking for work, and he accidentally stumbles upon a late-night news crew that goes around Los Angeles and is videotaping crimes, tragedies, basically anything that the news can tease and get people to watch. How Jake Gyllenhaal didn't get nominated for an Oscar for his performance is beyond me. He plays an absolutely despicable character. He's really the villain, but he does it so well that you end up liking him despite how horrible he is. He kind of starts off as a nobody with a video camera, but because of his lack of a conscience, he is able to muscle his way in to get a lot of the shots that other people wouldn't get. He sells them to this local news station, and he quickly becomes very high in demand. Great film, completely different from a lot of movies out there. Number 8, John Wick, a throwback to the old 80s and 90s action films with some modern sensibilities. Keanu Reeves is awesome in this. He gives a very layered performance that you probably don't notice at first. He doesn't talk a whole lot in the movie, but he does emote a lot, and it kind of veers back and forth between anger and sadness. I know part of the movie was already spoiled, but I'm not going to spoil it here, which is the motivation behind his rampage. The movie's about a character named John Wick, who was an ex-hitman who comes out of retirement to get revenge for something that happened to him. I could have done without the CGI blood splatters. That was the only thing that stuck out, but everything else was great. The fight choreography was great. A couple years ago, Keanu directed a movie called The Man of Tai Chi, and the action sequences in that were really good. And I think that factored a lot into this, because the gunplay and the martial arts and everything was very focused. They weren't shaking the camera all over the place. There were a lot of really long shots, so the choreography for that was, I'm sure, incredibly difficult, but it was appreciated because it brought you into the fights. That's one of my biggest problems with a lot of action movies today, is because of the zoomed in camera and the quick cuts, you can never tell what's going on, and the fights just, they have no resonance. Where in this, they're back just far enough that you can see what's going on, and with the way that they're shot, it's Keanu going through and breaking limbs and shooting people, and you always can follow what's going on. Number 7, Edge of Tomorrow. The best way to describe this is kind of the way that other people have. It's a science fiction version of Groundhog Day. Sometime in the future, this alien race comes down and starts conquering Earth. What happens, they always seem to know ahead of time what we're doing. Tom Cruise plays a soldier who gets drafted into the war, and while he's out on the battlefield for the first time, something happens that has him traveling back back to the previous day. So he keeps going out on the battlefield and learning a little bit more, and then dying and going back and trying again. It's outstanding. He meets up with another soldier, played by Emily Blunt, who actually knows what he's going through. So between the two of them, they try to use this as an advantage to be able to take down the enemy. This movie should have been a massive hit, but the studio, for whatever reason, decided to completely undermine the film. It's based off of the manga called All You Need Is Kill, and even though the movie was named Edge of Tomorrow, which I think is a terrible name, they marketed it as Live, Die, Repeat with little tiny letters, Edge of Tomorrow. So I think what happened was a lot of people saw the trailer and thought the movie was cool, but thought the movie was called Live, Die, Repeat. What's this Edge of Tomorrow movie? Terrible shame. This movie should have been huge. It never felt redundant because they kept pushing things forward. Even though they were repeating the same day over and over again, they were always doing different things with it. It never got boring, and even though the premise was kind of lifted from Groundhog Day, that's really the only thing that the two shared. Number 6. Blue Ruin. It's about a guy who's homeless and he's living out of his car. He finds out the guy who's responsible for the life that he's more or less now in has been let out of prison. And I'm actually going to stop talking about the movie there because I feel this is better the less you know about it. Just know that it's a revenge movie and kind of go from there, because one of the strong points of the movie is how over the course of the film they slowly unveil what's going on, and that made the movie just amazing. This isn't a big by the numbers focus tested film. This is the story that the director wanted to tell. He wrote it, he produced it, he put a lot of heart and soul into this, and that makes it that much more standout because there's a lot of things in the movie that normally wouldn't make it into a major AAA feature. I previously said I liked John Wick, and I did. I liked John Wick a lot. It was a great, fun action movie. But this is more of a drama with a few very short, action-y moments. Terrific movie. Not at all what I was expecting. Number 5, Odd Thomas. As a fan of Dean Koontz, it was sad to see that the majority of his films that were coming out either didn't have the budget behind them or they just weren't as good as they should have been. And finally, with Odd Thomas, they did justice to a Koontz novel. They had a nice-sized budget, they had a great cast, and they had a great director behind it. They got Stephen Sommers to front the film. They had all these things going for it. They made an awesome movie, and it gets dumped direct to video. An absolute tragedy. The movie's about Odd Thomas, who is a guy who's a short order cook, and he has clairvoyance. He can see the dead. And it's not, I can see dead people in like The Sixth Sense. It actually kind of has a little bit more of a John Dies at the End vibe. And I mean that in a positive way, because John Dies at the End is an excellent movie. It's just, it kind of shares that fast, quirky vibe. On top of being able to see the dead, Odd can also see these things called the Bodaks. They're these sort of demon creatures that feed off of negativity. And whenever a really bad event is about to take place, the Bodaks are around. So he notices that there is an overwhelming amount of Bodaks in the town, and that alerts him to know that there's something really bad that's going to happen. A phenomenal movie. I love this movie. It's such a shame that it didn't get 1/10 of the recognition that it should have. Everything in this was good. The acting was good. The directing was good. Even though there was a lot of CGI, Summers does tend to put a lot of CGI in his movies, it felt right. It all worked. I absolutely love this movie. Number 4, Gone Girl. This movie perfectly encapsulates how terrible the 24-hour news cycle has become. Ben Affleck plays a guy whose wife goes missing, and the media more or less crucifies the guy. It's probably the most genuine depiction of how despicable the current news media has become. Affleck is once again proving all of his naysayers wrong. He was outstanding in this. Rosamund Pike was great. Fincher's directing was top-notch as always. To show you how good of a director filmmaker Fincher is. Tyler Perry is in the movie, and he was good. It's a 2.5-hour movie that needed to be that long. A lot of movies are unnecessarily long. I'm looking at you, Transformers. Whereas this, it was 2.5 hours long because there was 2.5 hours of story that needed to get in there. It never felt slow. I was invested with it right from the start. Excellent movie. Number 3, Starry Eyes. It's about a girl named Sarah who's working a dead-end job in Los Angeles with the hopes of becoming an actress. And she finally gets an audition for a role that she knows she'd be perfect for. But the people that are giving the audition are very weird. And the movie's a test of how far she's willing to go to get the part. It's a very, very dark movie. They were actually denied one of their filming locations because the people that own the location deemed the movie too evil for them to be allowed to film there. This is an excellent slow burn horror film. It was made for very little money. I believe the production budget was about $50,000. And for a movie that looks this good, that is incredible. I've seen movies that have cost into the millions of dollars that didn't look as good as this, and they ended up being unmemorable garbage, whereas this is absolutely a new horror classic. Number 2, The Guest. There's no other way to start talking about this film other than, oh my god, is it awesome. This is coming from Adam Wingard, who was the director of You're Next, which is a movie from 2013 that I loved. And The Guest, I might actually like it more. It is unbelievably good. Everything about this movie I liked. There was not a single bad element in the entire thing. It's about a family who's mourning the loss of their son who died in the military. And a guy shows up at their doorstep who claims to be a friend of his, and they let him stay with them for a little while he's kind of getting his life back in order. Yet again, another movie that I don't want to talk about anything beyond that. Just know that it is one of the most fun times you'll have in a movie. About 15 minutes in, I started grinning, and I didn't stop until the movie was over. This soundtrack was hands down one of the best of the year. One of the best in 10 years. Go out, get this movie, watch it immediately. And now my number 1 movie of 2014, Lost Soul. I was lucky enough to catch this earlier in the year at the Philadelphia Film Festival. This is about the doomed journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. A lot of people know about the awful remake of The Island of Dr. Moreau in the 90s, and this tells the tale of how it happened. Essentially, Richard Stanley was a lower budget director who had directed 2 incredible movies. He did Hardware and Dust Devil, and was making a big impact in the industry. He caught a lot of people's attention, and he had always been fascinated with the Island of Dr. Moreau, and when he found out that they were doing a update to it, he wanted to be the director for it. The movie chronicles everything that he went to, all of his conceptual art, the meetings that he had, and even going so far as to getting a witch doctor to help put a spell on him to ensure that he would get the gig. Richard Stanley is a brilliant artist, but he's a very eccentric dude. However, what happened to him was not his fault. He originally went in with the notion that this was going to be a smaller production, which it was, but once the studio started attaching bigger names to it, the budget kept increasing, and a lot more pressure was put on him. Being somebody who was coming from a lower budget area, now having millions of dollars on the line and big egos like Val Kilmer at the time just made it unbearable. And a couple of days into the production, they fired him and replaced him. The documentary goes over the whole thing from the initial creation to the storyboarding, all the way up to its disastrous remake with Marlon Brando wearing an ice bucket on his head and talking to the world's smallest man. It was insanity. Unfortunately, because of how much of a disaster this was, Richard Stanley quit the industry. And that was a tragedy because he's so talented. All the work that they show that he had put into this, you can see that this was going to be something special and not the mess that it devolved into. Fantastic documentary, quickly became one of my favorites. Okay, that was the top 10. For the record, number 11 was Horns. It's based off of the book from Joe Hill and directed by Alexander Aja, who is one of my all-time favorite directors that kind of got stuck in a loop of doing nothing but remakes. So I was glad to see him finally break out of that and do something else. That leads me to my honorable mentions. I loved Guardians of the Galaxy. Cheap Thrills was terrific. That was another one that was in the list for a while and eventually got bumped out. Honeymoon was a wonderful mystery. I like Divergent a lot. I know it was based off of a young adult novel, but that doesn't mean it's a shitty movie. The Purge Anarchy was a genuine surprise because I hated the first Purge movie. It was actually one of the worst movies of 2013 for me, and Anarchy was everything that the first movie should have been. On top of being a great story, you had Frank Grillo, who was absolutely channeling the Punisher. So if ever you wanted to see a fourth Punisher movie, The Purge Anarchy is pretty much a Punisher movie. Snowpiercer, I thought was great. It got a little towards the end. I don't want to go into it because I don't want to spoil it. It's definitely worth checking out, but I felt that the ending was not as strong as it could have been. Predestination was a very smart time travel movie that did a very stupid thing. About halfway through the movie, they spoiled their own movie, and I don't know why they did that. Late Phases is one of the best werewolf movies I've seen in a while. Vampire Academy was surprisingly good. Godzilla was great. That was the Godzilla movie that we should have gotten back in 1999 instead of the big pile of shit that we did get. Big Hero 6 was a pleasant surprise, and Captain America the Winter Soldier. And now, the worst of the year. Before I get into that, though, I just want to get into the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles reboot. I didn't hate it. I actually thought that the script was good, but it was undone by being made by Michael Bay's production company. I know Bay didn't direct it, but it felt like he did. It had all of his earmarks. It was color corrected, teal and orange. It looked like the Transformers movies, and it just had nonsensical action sequences. My biggest complaint was the turtles themselves were too big. They were like 9 feet tall and built like linebackers. I know it may seem nitpicky, but they're ninjas. They're not supposed to be huge. They're supposed to be lean. They shouldn't have been these hulking monstrosities. It didn't ruin my childhood or any of that. It just was disappointing. I chuckled a few times watching the movie, and I just felt that if it had been handled by somebody else besides Platinum Dunes, it would have been better. With that out of the way, let's get into the worst of 2014. Lucy was a movie that I really wanted to like. You had a girl who was unlocking all the parts of her brain. I don't give a shit how scientifically inaccurate that is. It's a movie. So I didn't care about that. I didn't care that Element wasn't real. I normally like Luc Besson a lot. He's made some great movies. This just felt, I don't know, it just fell apart. Scarlett Johansson, the smarter that she got, the more robotic that she got. And I get that she was supposed to emulate that she was becoming emotionless. Even though it was only 89 minutes, it felt like it went on for too long. She gets smarter and smarter, and finally she becomes one with the universe and turns into a flash drive. Sorry. Coherence. This one actually bothers me because the idea is amazing. It's all about split realities crashing down on each other. And if they had done it straight, it would have been probably in my top 10. But because of the way that they chose to shoot the film in a style that I've come to find out is called mumblecore, it made the movie unbearable. I couldn't watch it. The filming style was insufferable. The way that they decided to film this movie was to hand the camera to a toddler and to hit record and let him go with it. Because that's what it felt like. The camera was flailing around wildly, pointing at the corner, pointing at somebody's forehead, no white balancing even. So every scene was blown out, and it looked like you were watching somebody's home movies. which brings me to the dialogue for the movie. The majority of it, from what I read, was improv, and it led to a lot of scenes where people were talking over one another. If you're at a party and people are talking over one another, that's one thing, because you're at a party and you don't really notice it. But if you're sitting back and you're watching a movie and there's dialogue going on and everybody is just yapping over one another, it takes you out of it. You lose focus and you don't care. So I know there are a lot of people that gave this their highest possible recommendation. This movie was just brilliant, and I partially agree. The idea was excellent. The execution was garbage. When I grew up, Ouija boards were one of the scariest things, and me and some friends had messed around with one and had a lot of really weird shit happened that still creeps me out to this day. They took a Ouija board, which is, in my opinion, one of the scariest things that you could put into a movie, and they made it boring. How do you do that? Well, here's how. You put in stupid shit like, you know, the little clear plastic thing that you use on a Ouija board to see the letters? Well, they inserted the dumb, if you look through there, you get to see into their world. And looking into the ghost realm, ghosts! And whenever they did that, they would look into the ghost realm, and of course there'd be a shadow in the background, a boo scare, and oh, it was terrible. I just hated it so much. There was nothing good about it. So of course they're making a sequel. And my number one worst movie of the year, Nurse 3D. Holy shit. This movie was terrible. I thought it was going to be a fun, goofy exploitation, and it ended up being a mess, a complete mess. It was all about a crazy nurse who was using her looks to entrap these guys into cheating on their wives, and then she would kill them. Great concept for a horror exploitation film. The biggest issue with it was the lead, Paz de la Huerta, who mumbled her way through the movie. I couldn't understand a large portion of what she was saying. It was just this forcibly trying to be sexy thing, and I had no idea what she was saying, which made it difficult to continue watching the movie because you quickly lose interest. It just came out that she's now suing the director, saying that after the movie was done, because of some disagreements that happened during the film, he dubbed all of her lines in and made her look awful, which ruined her career. So I don't know what to think. I can't possibly think that a director would purposely sabotage his own movie just to get back at a shitty actress. But on the flip side of that, I can't possibly see somebody giving this horrible a performance and continuing to work. So I don't know. It'll be interesting if this goes to court and it comes out that that really happened, that she gave a good performance and they just dubbed in all of her lines, but that still doesn't make up for just how awkward and clumsy she was throughout the movie. Even if her original dialogue got put back into the movie, I can't see this being much better. It was a bad movie. So finally, that is my top 10 of 2014. If you agree, great. If you disagree, also great. I'm sure there's plenty of movies that you've seen that you feel should have been on this list. I'm sure you probably think there were some movies that should have been on the bottom of the list. For example, I haven't watched Transformers 4. So in case you're wondering why that's not on the bottom, I can't say because I haven't watched it. And I'm not going to lie and say that it was garbage because I didn't see it. I didn't have 3 hours to dedicate to it, and I wasn't a big fan of the other movies. I'm just going off of the feeling that I probably wouldn't have liked it, so I chose to not watch it. Actually waiting for the Riff Tracks version. These are just my favorite movies of last year. I'm hoping that maybe there's some movies on the list that people haven't seen, and they'll go and check them out and like them. I always like turning people on to good movies, and I like giving credit where credit's due. And my top 10 and my honorable mentions, I genuinely feel that all of them deserve to be checked out. That's all I got for this year. I'll see you next time.